Hi, this is Grandma here, and I'm reading The House of 60 Fathers by Meindert, DeJong. Before we begin, I want to first of all preview the book a little bit with you. Here's the cover of the book. And what do you see on the cover? What do you know about that boy? Well, we know that he's probably under the age of 10. That his pig is not to be eaten, but rather is more of a pet, and he appears to be Asian. The other thing that we see on this is this symbol here, and that is indicates that this was a Newbery Medal book, and Newbery books are for Newbery medals are for outstanding books in children, young adult literature. The other thing that's interesting is the title, The House of 60 Fathers. What in the world could that mean? Does it mean that he lived in a place that had 60 fathers, maybe 60 priests? Or is it a genealogy thing where his family can trace back 60 fathers? We don't know. The other thing we do when we're previewing a book is we look at the back and we read what's on the back. We see that this is a book aimed for people between the ages of 10 to 14. Teen Pao is all alone in enemy territory. Only a few days before, the family had escaped from the Japanese army, fleeing downriver by boat. Then came the terrible rainstorm. Tien Pao was fast asleep in the little sampan when the boat broke loose from its moorings and drifted right back to the Japanese soldiers. With only his lucky pig for company, Tien Pao must begin a long and dangerous journey in search of his home and family. Not only a tense adventure, but also a moving picture of one small boy's tenacious courage. And that was from the New York Times. The next thing we do when we're previewing a book is we look at the pictures. So we have a picture here of a boy. Now, does he look happy? Does he look sad? He looks sad. He looks like maybe he's hungry because he's holding an empty bowl with chopsticks. And here's another picture of him. And you can see that he and his pig have a very good relationship. Looking at other pictures in the book, and there are so many wonderful pictures in the book. Here we see a picture of him with his pig and a Jeep. Well, it did say it was military was involved. Here's a picture of the boy being carried by what looks like men who are soldiers. Do you think that they are enemy soldiers or do you think they're friendly soldiers? Well, we'll find out when we start the book, won't we? Okay, so The House of 60 Fathers, Chapter 1, Rain on the Sampan. Now, sampan is a kind of boat, and it's a kind of houseboat, and they do have a picture of some here. Here's a picture of one here. And one thing I want you to notice is the roof. The roof is not made of plastic or metal or wood, but it's rather woven mats, like straw that has been woven. And they really have a very distinct look to them. They're long, and people actually live on them. So let's go back and find out what the story is. Oh, here's another picture of some sampans. And you can also see that there is a military person looking at them in this picture. And you can see that there are several of them docked at the same place. Rain on the Sampan. Chapter 1. Rain raised the river. Rain beat down on the sampan where it lay in a long row of sampans tied to the riverbank. Rain drummed down on the mats that were shaped in the form of an arched roof over the middle of the sampan. It clattered hard on the 4 long oars lying on top of the roof of mats. The rain found the bullet hole in the roof of mats, which makes us think, why is there a bullet hole there? Thick drops of water dripped through the bullet hole onto the neck of the family pig, sleeping on the floor of the sampan. The little pig twitched his neck every time a big cold drop of water hit it, but he went on sleeping. Tin Pao looked on in quiet amusement to see how many cold drops it would take to wake the pig. It took 9. Then, with a disgusted grunt, the little pig slid over just far enough to get his neck from under the drip. But the drip from the bullet hole began making a big puddle on the floor. With his bare toes, Tin Pao shoved the dishpan with the 3 ducklings under the drip. He settled himself on the bench again and leaned his head against the wall of mats. The little pig was sound asleep. The ducklings went to sleep in a little huddle at the bottom of the dishpan. The drumming of the rain on the matting overhead became so monotonous, Tin Pao's head began to nod. Under half-shut eyelids, he saw the sleeping ducklings rise on the water that dripped into their pan. They drifted in their sleep. The big, monotonous drops kept stirring the water. Rain raised the river. The sampan swayed and bobbed on the rising water. Voices drifted from the other sampans in the long row of sampans and muttered among the drumming rain. Tin Pao closed his eyes and almost slept, and yet he didn't sleep. He sat sagged against the mats, dreaming, remembering the hard days just past, the hard journey. It had been a long journey. Tin Pao had lost count of all the days and nights, but all those nights when the horns of the new moon had stood dimly in the sky, Tin Pao and his father and mother had pushed the sampan on and on against the currents of the endless river. Day and night. There was no stopping even at night. "We won't stop until we drop," Tin Pao's father kept saying over and over, "and we won't drop until we are far inside this great land of China, far from the sea, for where the sea is, there the Japanese invaders are." The family pig, the 3 ducklings, and the little stone mill to grind the rice for his baby sister, these they had saved from the mud house of the family of Tian that had stood a little beyond their village of the corner of the mountains where the rivers meet, and that's the name of the village. Beside these, they had saved absolutely nothing except Beauty of the Republic, Tin Pao's baby sister. By the way, this is called a flashback, when a book begins at one point of time and the main character is remembering an earlier time. That's called a flashback. Suddenly one morning, the Japanese had come. Bullets had whined through the crooked streets of the village. Bullets had pierced the mud walls of the house. People had screamed. There had been terrible screams inside the houses. The Japanese soldiers had come in at one end of the village, and like a herd of lowing cattle, the villagers had run out of the other end, so the river and the sampans. They had crowded into the sampans, they had shoved them madly into the river. Over the river had come a snarling roar. Japanese planes had burst out of the clouds, had hurled themselves at the crowded sampans. Bullets had stuttered out of the screeching, diving planes. A horrible hail of bullets had slammed into the sampans. Back and back, the planes had come with their hail of bullets, while sampans sank and went under. Back and back until there was but one empty sampan left drifting on the water. Then the planes had come no more, not for one empty sampan. It had drifted silently, empty. The family of Tin had seen it all from the clump of bamboos at the edge of the river where they had crouched. The planes had passed, the air above the river was still and empty. But now the shooting in the village had drawn nearer. Now, Tian Shu, the father had whispered in the bamboo clump to his little family. "It is now or never." He had plunged into the river after the drifting sampan. Tien Pao and his mother, with Beauty of the Republic strapped to her back, had plunged after him. His mother had the rice mill. Tien Pao had the family pig under one arm, the dishpan with the ducklings squeezed against his chest, but his father had boarded the empty sampan, and his father had pulled everything and everybody on board. He'd simply pulled Tien Pao up by his head and his neck, while Tien Pao clung to the pig and the dishpan. Then Tien Pao's father had run to the back of the sampan and grabbed the oars. Tien Pao had started for the front of the sampan to take the oars there, but his mother had caught him and flung him to the floor of the sampan. "No," she whispered fiercely, "children must live." She'd unstrapped the baby and had pushed her at Tim Pen where he lay on the floor. She'd made Tien Pao hold his hand over the hole made by the Japanese bullet in the floor of the sampan, and she'd gone to the oars at the front of the sampan. And here's a picture of Tien Pao with his sister, Beauty of the Republic. On the floor, Tien Pao had held Beauty of the Republic tightly against him, while with his other hand he twisted his cap into a prop to shove into the bullet hole through which the river water came welling. He'd lain on the prop to keep the water from pushing it out again, and he'd lain half over the baby's sister to shield her if the airplanes and the bullets should come again. His father and mother had stood upright at the oars, and no bullets had come. No airplanes had hurtled at them out of the clouds. But behind him, Tien Pao had heard the roar of flames as the whole village burned. The flames, in a great hungry sweep, had pushed from thatched roof to thatched roof, and the hollow bamboo framework inside the mud walls had exploded with the terrifying sound of guns. Sparks had rained on the river from the explosions, and the sampan had swept in on the water, gone red from the flames. The water was red from the flames. In the leaping, sharp brightness of the flames, Tien Pao's mother and father stood upright. Stern and silent at the great oars, they'd pushed the sampan up the river away from the sparks and explosions of the roaring village. The sampan had gone up many rivers in the following days and nights. Out of great rivers, as rivers grow great as they near the sea, into smaller, narrowing rivers, the further they went inland. Push and pull and pull and push at the long sweeping oars, day and night, night and day, always against the current. Tien Pao had taken his turn at the oars for long, hard hours, spelling his father or his mother by night or by day in the endless, hard journey. Now at last the sampan lay tied to the bank at the end of a long row of sampans that belonged to the river town of Hengyang. That was Tien Pao's first whole day of rest. Tien Pao's father and mother had not rested. The family of Tien was now safe from the Japanese, but they were penniless in a strange big city. There was no food in the sampan. They had the sampan and nothing else. They must find work immediately or starve. Last night, the Hengyang River people on the other sampans had told them that there was much work at great fields for airplanes not many miles from the town. This morning, in the early dark rainy dawn, Tien Pao's father and his mother, with the baby strapped on her back, had gone with their new neighbors. Now it was late afternoon and they had not come back. So, to explain a little bit about what's going on is they have gone up the river into a safer territory, but they have no money. So they need work. So they are going with other people who are on sampans to an airfield and to build an airfield for airplanes. I'm assuming it's for Americans or Chinese, not the Japanese. Okay. Now it was late afternoon and they had not come back. It must mean that they were working for white foreigners, the American airmen who had come over the ocean from a strange foreign land to help the Chinese fight the Japanese invaders. Tien Pao had not understood it too well when last night the new neighbors had explained about the great airfield to his father. He'd been too stupefied with weariness. He'd not known that airplanes needed fields, almost as if they were cows or grazing goats. He'd never seen a white foreigner, but airplanes he knew. Airplanes came screaming out of the sky, and out of them bullets stuttered. And then the water spat, and sampans sank, and people fell, and a whole village burned, while an empty river, red from flames, one sampan drifted on red water. Tien Pao moaned aloud. His moan roused him. He jumped to his feet and stood shivering. He shook himself to get rid of the evil memories. It was rain dark inside the sampan, and the dark was scary. He was scared. He hurried to the saucer of oil that stood before the mirror and the little altar to the river god, and trembling lit the wick. The flickering, smoking saucer lamp reflected on the altar mirror and sent yellow rays of light over the ducklings and the pig. So their family worships a river god. They don't worship the same kind of gods that most of us are familiar with. Tien Pao looked at them, not at the wedge of wood that had been driven into the sampan floor to close the hole made by Japanese bullet, and his lips mumbled, grateful for the light. The light is good, and the river god that sent us the sampan is good, he whispered, but he couldn't help the last little shiver that still ran through him as he bowed and bowed himself before the altar of the good river god who had sent the sampan and had saved the whole family of Tien. Outside, all at once, the other sampans became noisy with shouts. The river must have stopped, or the rain must have stopped. For a moment, the sinking evening sun shone bright over the river. Women and children from all the sampans were swarming up the riverbank, out-shouting each other to attract the attention of some passenger who wanted to be ferried across the river. Tien Pao peered through a crack in the mats, but he couldn't see the top of the bank. He pushed the mat aside and stepped out. But when he looked up the high bank, he had to cling to the matting for support. On top of the river bank stood the river god. It must be the river god. His hair was golden, and his face was white. In that white face were pale blue eyes. People had dark hair and dark eyes. It must be a river god. At that moment, the god on top of the riverbank looked right at Tien Pao, and then he came plunging down the high bank straight toward Tien Pao and the narrow gangplank that reached from the sampan to the shore. Tien Pao clutched the matting. "Mother!" he croaked. He could stand there no longer. He dived into the sampan, shoved the mats across the opening. He looked wildly about him. He grabbed the sleeping pig. The family pig was the best thing he had. He'd offer the pig to the river god. He dashed with the little pig to the far end of the sampan and stood trembling before the river god's own altar. The mats parted. The golden-haired, blue-eyed god stepped into the sampan. Tien Pao's knees quaked under him, but somehow he managed to take a few steps forward. He almost shoved the little pig into the white one's arms. Then he backed away to the altar again, bowing deeply to the god as he backed toward the god's own altar. The strange white one stood in the opening, looking in open-mouthed surprise from the little pig that had been tossed into his arms to the bowing and scraping Tien Pao. Suddenly he threw his head back, and out of him came a great howling roar of laughter. The god laughed. It was too much for Tien Pao. In his confusion, he desperately dashed past the roaring river god and out of the sampan. The new neighbor women were standing outside her sampan. "Please, please, I don't know what the strange white river god wants of me," Tien Pao managed to whisper. The woman, too, laughed at him. "Stranger child, he is not a god. He is an American airman from the great field for airplanes, and he wants you to take him over the river. He picked you, I guess, because you did not shout his ears off like the rest of us. Well, that is certainly interesting. It had never occurred to me that somebody had never seen anybody with blue eyes and blonde hair and white skin, and that they would think that they are a god. But I think that that has happened even in our country, possibly when Native Americans first saw people from Europe. I think it probably did happen. So his family has gone to the airfield to work, and he has a good-humored, seems to be nice, airman on the sampan, and he wants to be ferried across the river. What do you think Tien Pow's going to do? Well, we'll find out in the next part of Chapter 1. Bye-bye.